Welcome back to part 2 of our live training session here with our Supercharged Honda S2000. In this tutorial, we're going to be taking a look how to get our engine fired up and running on the Link G4x plug-and-play system. In the last video, we created our base calibration file. We're going to be uploading it in this tutorial, doing a basic sensor check, checking our timing with a timing light, and then making sure we have things like our fuel and our spark timing and our idle control sorted out so the engine can fire up and run and maintain an idle so we can move on to the next process and our next tutorial, taking a look at the part throttle cruise operation and tuning. We're gonna have a lot to cover. Let's jump into our tutorial so we can get started. Welcome back to our live training session here with our Supercharged Honda S2000. In our last video, we built the base file. This video, we're gonna go in, do a basic sensor check, check our timing with a timing light, get the engine to fire up and run, validate our fuel and airflow modeling within our model mode, making sure everything's right, making sure the idle control is good, and then we're gonna check our cranking fuel, making sure the engine can crank, fire up, and run. Now the biggest thing with this is we need to make sure that the engine can hold its own idle and do that stably as we're driving the car. In the next video, doing our part throttle cruise style calibration process, we need to make sure the engine can hold its own idle. If we're driving and it's constantly stalling, or if we're having erratic idle, it's not going to be good. So we need to make sure that we're covering these basic steps and making sure that the idle is going to be solid. The other thing I want to mention here is that the engine is cold. We're going to make sure that the engine comes up to operating temperature before we make any major adjustments. Now, we don't know exactly where everything's going to be at in terms of the fuel and spark timing, so that's what we're going to sort out in this tutorial, but we need to make sure that the engine has warmed up so it's overcame what's known as the wall wetting effect, where the fuel wants to stick to the intake track and to the intake valves because it's going to not atomize very well. When this happens, we'll find that the fuel is usually thrown off a bit. We need to add a little bit more fuel when the engine's actually firing up and running cold. We can't evaluate any of that until we actually have the engine operating up to normal, coming up to normal operating temperature. Then we can check the fuel and airflow modeling, and then when the engine cools down overnight, we can check the cold start into warm-up enrichment. We'll be doing that in a separate tutorial, but the focus is always when you get the engine to fire up and run for the very first time, we need to make sure that we don't have something like our warm-up enrichment aggressively applying too much fuel, but we can't validate that until we've actually tuned out the main fuel table and made sure the fuel and airflow model are valid. So we need to just get the engine up to operating temperature. That's our goal here. Get it up to operating temperature, check everything, make sure it's all good, and then we can move on in the calibration process. But we have a lot of things to cover in this tutorial. So the first thing I want to talk about here is doing a basic sensor check. Now I've uploaded that file that we built in the last video, the base file. I've uploaded that into the link here. It's actually pretty simple. We can see right now the base file is open. I simply went to open and I went into sourcing that file. I've saved it into a documents, and down here into link I've created a new folder for it, EPA S2000. You simply just select that, click open, and it'll ask you if you want to store that to the ECU and upload it, and that's what I did. So I just uploaded it. I wiped out the original stock equivalent file that was on the link. So got rid of that. We've uploaded the base file that we've built that's more specific to this vehicle. So the injector size, the modifications that have been done, that's supercharged. The base map is really only good for naturally aspirated. So taking a look at this, we don't need to do a whole lot more in here. Now, one thing I did notice before we continue on here is down under the Stoich ratio. This has changed. It's not 14.7, it's actually 14.1. I don't know why that changed it in save. I'm just going to do Control S there and save and store that. Well, actually, I stored it right there to the ECU. We'll click save, so it's saving it to the base file. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Save As, and I'm going to save this file now as my, let's call it idle tuning, so we can just differentiate this and gives ourselves a way to go backwards or forward in the calibration process. So I don't want to overwrite my base file. I'm simply going to go and call this idle tuning. So I can have that in the next video. We do a part throttle cruise, we'll call that part throttle cruise tuning, and then wide open throttle tuning. So it gives us a way that we can go backwards or forwards in case we're unsure, maybe something's going bad as we're doing our calibration and tuning. We can go back to the previous section that we were tuning that we can have as a starting point. So we always want to have a starting and stopping point, being able to move forward or backwards in the calibration process. Very important with this. All right, so that looks good. I think everything is solid here in the file. Let's just peek into a couple other tables, just make sure that this saved properly. Looks like this file was good. That's the values that we placed into the table. Looks like our axes are still scaled the way we had it. Looks like our air fuel table is where we had it. Spark timing, let's double check that, just to make sure everything is good here. That looks good. Okay, this all looks good. So now let's do our basic sensor check. So what we're going to do right now is make sure that we have things like our map sensor, throttle position sensor, intake air temp sensor, engine coolant temp sensor. Those are all some of the more basic sensors coming in, but those need to read right, because if they don't, we can't apply any kind of correction factors based on coolant temperature or air temperature. If our map sensor is not reading right, we're going to find that it's not going to reference the proper load indexing to the fuel and spark timing in the actual main fuel and spark timing tables. That's going to throw off everything. We want to make sure that those are right. So if we take a look here in the middle of our screen, in this particular basics layout page, we're going to find that we have all of these different basic sensor channels. So we have our engine speed, map pressure, engine coolant temperature, air temperature, and throttle position. We also have baro pressure here as well. Now looking at all of this, we also have our lambda sensor right here. Now looking at all this, this is going to be our basic sensor channels that we want to make sure are working properly before we fire up the engine. If at this point, since we're creating the base file, or created the base file, we've uploaded it, we want to make sure that anything that is going to be potentially a calibration issue or calibration error is taken care of before we actually fire the engine off, because it can start to skew up what's going on in the fuel or airflow modeling. So what we want to do here is just take a look. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here. And you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.